Today I will try to make an appropriately medieval version of the Knights Templar flag. There are many different versions of the Templar cross. All we have to go on is drawings and paintings done by people closer to that time. So this is the design I've chosen to go with. I'm going to make a two-piece red cross on a white background with two tails, which seems to be very common at the time. Size-wise, I will go with 2 feet high and 4.5 feet long, and the arms of the red cross are 20 inches long and 8 inches wide. Back in those times, to make a flag double-sided, they would make 2 single-sided flags and sew them back to back, so that the design would be fully built up on both sides. So that's what I'll be doing as well. I'll draw a pattern for the cross because I'll need 4 identical pieces. I'll start with a centre line 20 inches long and marking the middle as well. Then I draw a line either end which is 8 inches long. I then draw a line from the centre to each corner. I measure and mark the halfway point to the centre on each of these diagonals, and then draw a line from these points to the opposing corner. On the centre line I now mark out my 3-inch width and then draw these lines accordingly. Lastly, I mark the halfway points on all of these lines and then join them up, creating the curve. I then just add a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around and then cut it out. For the red fabric I will be using this piece of cotton which is left over from another build, and it's just enough to cut out my 4 pieces. For the white fabric I'll be using this lightweight cotton canvas, which I think looks nice and rustic. I'll begin with the red crosses, so all I need to do is trace around my patterns 4 times and cut them out. I will next iron over their 3/8 of an inch seam allowances to make them ready for sewing. It's a good idea to cut small notches on a concave curve so that the seam allowance folds over more easily. I then move on to the white fabric, and I folded it in half so that I can cut 2 pieces at once. And I'll be drawing the entire size and shape of the flag in one piece. So that's my 4.5 feet by 2 feet plus the big notch at the end for the 2 tails. And then I add a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. And these are the 2 pieces now cut out in their final shape. I am now marking the midpoints on all 4 edges so that I can join up these lines with chalk for an accurate centre. I can now place my first cross piece along this chalk line as an accurate guide. And I take my time to make sure that it's all neat and all the seam allowances are nicely tucked away, and then I pin it in place. And the extra seam allowance on each corner can just be trimmed off. And of course use as many pins as you need. In my experience, the more pins the better. I then repeat this exact same process for the other piece of the flag. I try to make both pieces of the flag at the same time so that they'll both be ready at the same time. To sew them on, it's just a case of top stitching near to the edge, as close to the edge as you can. And just take it nice and slowly to keep everything neat. And now I can place the second piece of the cross on top of this one, exactly the same way as before, just making sure the seam allowances are neatly tucked away, and add as many pins as you need. And of course I repeat this process for the other piece of the flag. And again, as with the one before, I will just top stitch this in place around the edges. And now the design part of this flag is now all built up, so I have 2 identical pieces. I'm going to iron over the 1/2 inch seam allowances on the leading edge, just to make things a bit easier for later on. I now move on to start sewing these 2 pieces of the flag together. And to do this I need to carefully line them up with their front sides facing each other. And then I pin them together all the way around the edge. On pieces this size it can take a while to line them up though. I then sew them together normally all the way around the edge along their 1/2 inch seam allowances. And this is what I have so far, basically a giant pair of trousers. I'm going to iron the seams flat all of the way around. When I turn it the right way around, this will help to make the edges crisp. For the 5 hanging loops, I have drawn this pattern, which is 5 inches by 5 inches plus ½ inch seam allowance all the way around. And I go ahead and cut these out from the same white canvas. To make these loops, I simply fold it in half and sew down along this edge. I can then turn this inside out and then repeat this for the other 4. Now I'm going to iron these pieces flat, with the seam line in the center, thereby effectively hiding it. I then fold these in half and iron again. To keep these folded together, I'll just do a few stitches along the raw edge. And that is the loops completed. I'm now going to position and pin these loops onto one side of the flag. It doesn't matter which side. I place the 2 corner loops first, and then I measure the middle of the flag and place the center one. And then I place the remaining 2 loops exactly halfway between these existing ones. I then go ahead and sew these loops onto this one side of the flag. When that's done, I make sure that everything is lying properly, and then I can just pin the front and back of the flag together along this top edge. And to sew this together, I'm simply top stitching through all of these layers. And this is what we have so far. It's almost finished and I think it's looking really good. The last thing I'm going to do is sew all the way around the flag, ½ inch away from the edge, and a second row right next to the edge. And after a quick iron, this is the flag completely finished. I'm happy with how it's turned out, and again we can only really guess about the authentic design, but I think we're close. Thank you for watching, and hopefully you have enjoyed and maybe even learned something, and I'll see you next time.